All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Hawk Droppings. I'm Hawk. I'm your host. This episode is going to be our H5N1 bird flu extravaganza. I have a very, very special guest tonight, someone who I found on TikTok around May of 2021, shortly after joining. And I'm fortunate enough that she and I have become good friends since then. You guys know her on TikTok as Laughter and Light. She is a scientist and is someone who kept us legitimately informed with actual scientific information and data throughout the COVID pandemic. And so in introducing her, I'm always mindful of the fact that she and I had a little fun on this app about 18 months ago involving our identities. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. Laughter and Light.
Thank you. Yeah, it was quite a time going through that height of the pandemic, and that's what spawned my interest in social media. I am a scientist by training, PhD from a Department of Physiology Biophysics with a specialty in immunology. So my professor that I work for is co-listed. People sometimes ask if they see like my university, they're like, "Wait, is it immunology or physiology biophysics?" And I'm like, there's a lot of both with a heavy focus on immunology. So the field would call me an immunologist by training. I was in academia for about 15 years. And I had this interesting moment in life where I had a grant awarded to go on and start my own laboratory as a professor. And then I also had an offer from a startup company at the same time, like 12 hours apart in my inbox, right? And I was like, wow, okay. And, what do you do? Because as an academic scientist, you work really hard to get to that point. And I was very burnt out. And so I kind of decided, all right, I'm going to go learn something new. And I might have been one of the first postdocs in history to turn down that grant award. And I went on to a startup company, learned a lot, and about 6 months later founded my own company because I really had a lot of ideas. This is the other reason why I moved on from academia. I had a lot of ideas that you weren't really able to bring them forth in the academic world as quickly as you could in the business world. And I thought, I don't want to wait 20 years and cross my fingers that these ideas that I know can help people or do good things for the world actually happen, right? So that was my motivation for starting a company, is that I want to see good science come to people. And then when I looked around and help people and make their lives better. And when I looked around during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, I realized how far we were away from that. People were getting fed this and that, and you're going to grow a tail and get 5G and become magnetic if you're vaccinated. And I'm just like, This is really happening. People are believing this. I've got to get on. I've got to tell them no.
I had forgotten about becoming magnetic.
Oh yeah. It was quite the thing for a while.
Man.
So that aligned pretty well with my personal motivations, and I have come to learn that most people. I was reminded actually that, most people never take a science class after high school. And it's very easy to put things together that sound real if you know what you're doing, and kind of lead people down a garden path and then kind of feed them a line. So there's a lot of that happening right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And but thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it, just because I want the information, and I thought it would be good to share it with everybody who listens to our podcast. All right, so we're going to talk about H5N1 bird flu today. It's been in the news lately. There have been a couple of human cases in the U.S. There's been one death, from what I understand, at this point. So just like broad strokes, what is H5N1? What do we need to generally know about it and its history to date?
Yeah, so it's a highly pathogenic influenza, and that is kind of meaning that it's a killer, and it's the first case. You can go back pretty far in history and look for cases, but the first real documented case that's the most similar to the variants we have circulating today was in China in 1996, and there have been some sporadic outbreaks over the last few years here and there, mostly in Asia. And they've been pretty deadly. It's around a 52 to 56% case fatality rate in those documented outbreaks.
Okay, so like a 52% mortality rate in humans or animals?
In humans. So that is
wow.
Perhaps a bit higher. Yeah, it's really scary. So a lot of people are going to say that number. You're going to hear it more than once when people really start talking about this. And maybe your audience already has. That, however, is likely to come down. Usually early case reports are the sickest people who maybe don't have access to healthcare and medicine, and they end up at the hospitals like the very last resort. And so usually the case fatality rate comes down when the disease becomes more widespread.
Okay. And obviously, please tell me if I get anything wrong here. So from what I understand, from what I've read, it's an upper respiratory infection that has not mutated to a point yet where it's transmissible from person to person, correct?
Yes, so it's a respiratory infection. Part of it, going person to person, was a mutate to be truly upper respiratory and replicate well in the upper respiratory tract. But yes, it has not mutated to spread person to person yet. Though I think, it's the mutations that we've seen in the two cases that you mentioned are really knocking on the door of that. So the case of the 13-year-old teenager who was hospitalized in British Columbia, it was a really sad story. The kid almost died. They were on ECMO, which is kind of bypassing heart and lung machine, just to keep them alive. And that's a 13-year-old with no underlying conditions.
Yeah,
they had
no
a mutation.
Comorbidities.
Yeah, no comorbid. I think they had like very light, well-controlled asthma, which is not even a risk factor for SARS-CoV-2 if it's well controlled. But they had a mutation, so the virus was mutating in this person, and when they looked at it, they found a mutation that is predicted to make it human-to-human transmissible. But the hospital took the right precautions, and as far as we know, no other cases have resulted from that.
So, okay. And I mean, viruses like this, they don't ever stop mutating, correct?
They do not. Yeah.
Outstanding.
Amazing. It's just going to keep going. Yeah. So I did a post recently on how and why kind of viruses mutate. I can go over that if that's helpful.
I mean, are they mutating with some kind of goal, or this is just what they do? They're just adapting to whatever host they find themselves in at that moment?
Yeah. So viruses don't really have a goal in mutation, but what happens is, as you or I are infected with a virus, billions of copies are made inside of us. And so and viruses, unlike our cells, when they replicate their genetic material, there are some viruses with a primitive error checking method, but influenza doesn't have an error checking method. So mistakes are made during that replication process, and mutations can show up. And so with billions of copies and a couple mistakes made, here and there, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Something is going to eventually stick and infect our cells better, and then start to really take off and replicate inside the human cells.
So do viruses have an ability to, like, if they mutate in a way that makes them more infectious in humans or more effective in infecting humans, that the virus will build on that mutation to strengthen that?
Yes, exactly. So if it becomes, if it can easily infect human cells, that version of those mutations will start to replicate faster inside the human. and the other ones will kind of die off. It'll take over. And then the whole mutational process continues.
Okay. Oh, boy.
Yeah, we used to laugh because immunology conferences, before SARS-CoV-2 pandemic and all that, were quite the parties. We study not the most exciting, happy topics.
Well, I mean, and if this has been around since 96, it's like this virus or some version of it has been mutating for almost 20 years.
Yeah, more, a little more than that. Yeah. And so it's, the reason why it's such a concern now, and, it's ramping up as a concern, about 2 years ago, it accumulated enough mutations or the right mutations to start infecting mammals very heavily. So that has been a big problem. There's been large die-offs in sea lions. It's been found in wild animals all over the world at this point.
I mean, didn't it just like wipe out the entire population of like a big cat sanctuary recently?
Yes. In Washington, I think it was Washington State. It's terrifying. Yeah. So
you say mammals. I'm assuming, given its name, bird flu, that before that it was primarily found in birds.
Exactly. And it has infected, wild bird populations, backyard flocks. That is where, and that's a major point of transmission. That is where the patient in Louisiana was infected, and he had a backyard flock of birds. So, for everyone who's kind of a hobbyist and you love your chickens and your ducks, it is something you have to be careful with.
Well, okay. So given that we just had the election, let me ask you this. Does bird flu currently have anything to do with the high price of eggs?
I would venture to say yes on that. I don't have direct evidence on it, but there have been millions of birds that have been culled. Iowa is a major egg producing state in the U.S. And I think they had I want to say 1.4, I'd have to look up the exact number, million bird flock that was infected. California has been culling major flocks. California is also a major egg producer. Outbreaks have been happening across the United States. So there's that. And then there was a salmonella recall in eggs recently. So those two kind of collided. And the problem is it takes chickens a little while to mature. But so for a few months, we're not going to have replacement egg layers.
So how to ask this? I mean, is it something where, like one mutation just happens to occur and then that's it? It is transmissible from humans to humans, or does that kind of ramp up a little bit over time, or is it pretty immediate?
That's a good and important question. It's a tough scientific question because it could be one mutation. It could be a combination of mutations. I'm kind of trying to figure out, I want to get the timeline right, but it was several months ago that we saw another mutation kind of land in some of the major variants that brought it one step closer to transmitting human to human. And now we're only one mutation away if they get it in the right site, if the virus does. Yeah.
Well, alrighty then. Oh, Jesus.
It's not far off. All right. That's why I started posting about this a little more seriously. I watched it very closely over the summer, but we're in the danger zone now. I think it's going to happen soon.
Okay. In that context, how would you define the word soon?
Right. So again, working with limited data and stochastic processes of viral mutation, which can be very random, and there's a lot of variables here. Let me just put it that way. Sure. I'm guesstimating sometime within the next 2 years is my best estimate as to when we will see sustained human-to-human transmission.
Okay.
It could
And
be as soon as next month. It could be 24 months from now.
all right. Well, I mean, I'll say this. I mean, I saw one of your TikToks talking about this, and immediately got on Amazon and ordered 100 new N95 masks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that. So is there anything yet that is known about once it reaches human to human transmission, the pace that it will be able to spread among people?
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a bit of good news. So influenza does not spread as easily as measles or SARS-CoV-2. It takes, different variants have different, what they call plaque forming units, PFUs. Is a little technical, but basically it's the amount of virus that it takes to start an infection in someone. But in general, influenza is much lower than SARS-CoV-2 and measles. So it's not considered true. Like it's considered a little bit of a mix of droplet and airborne. It's kind of like you need larger doses to get infected. So it's more surface. It lives longer on surfaces, things you touch, droplets, close contact with someone, or if there's a lot of aerosol in the room. Let's say you're in a choir singing and two people next to you are infected. You could get it through aerosols that way. But the transmission rate is slower, with fewer people being infected by one person.
Okay. All right. So I want to make sure I understand this. So COVID was a coronavirus, right?
Yes.
And bird flu is an influenza virus, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And influenza viruses are a bit harder to spread than the coronaviruses are, correct?
Yeah.
Or at least it can involve a different mechanism of transmission.
Yes. Well, it's pretty much the same, droplet and airborne, but the ability for influenza to infect cells requires it to be like a little bit more spread to than the SARS-CoV-2 virus. SARS-CoV-2 virus is really sticky. It's kind of mutated to be more transmissible over time. So it's really sticky. You don't need a high dose. Yeah, it's been great. It's
cool.
self-selected to be more sorry. This is better than influenza virus does. And, so the R naught is the technical term, or kind of the effective transmission rate. So for influenza, it's typically one person will spread it to 1.2 to like 1.8 other people. For SARS-CoV-2, I think right now we believe it's around 6 other people can get infected from one person.
Okay. Yeah, that reminded me of that scene from Mad Men. I think it's in like the first couple episodes when they're doing an ad pitch to the guys from the cigarette company that they've had as a client forever. And they're griping about the government saying you can't use any of these certain things in cigarette ads. And Don Draper goes, "Well, how are your cigarettes made?" And the guy starts describing it, and he says, "And then we toast the tobacco leaves." And Don Draper's like, "There it is. That's it. It's toasted." And so bird flu, it's sticky.
Sticky. No, SARS-CoV-2 is stickier than bird flu, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Let me double check something because I was working off memory there.
Okay.
And it's been a long day. But yeah, hang on.
Well, so from what I understand, there is a vaccine that exists for H5N1, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And tell me if this is correct. I was listening to something, and I can't remember who was being interviewed, but they was like, that has been around for a long time. That vaccine's been around for a long time. And the first thing that popped into my head is like, well, if it's mutated enough to the point where it's now at some point going to be human to human transmission, would a vaccine that's 8 or 10 years old still be effective? Or as effective?
Yes. So that's a good question because that's exactly what we've gone through with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, right? Like the virus has
Right.
mutated and we have issues with that. So that's because the place where the antibodies bind to the SARS-CoV-2 virus has itself been mutating. That's how it gets into the cells. And so the virus that can get around those antibodies binding persists on. The vaccine for H5N1 has two different proteins in it that will help the immune system kind of see the whole thing better and not, how do I put this? Okay, so the proteins that are necessary to get into the cell may not be the places where the mutations that the antibodies recognize are occurring.
Okay.
Did I say that right? Should I try that again? Let me try that one more time.
But the antibodies are the vaccine, right?
The antibodies are what are produced in your body in response to the vaccine. So then they go on. And so it's like your immune system gets a training session. And it's like, okay, it's like studying up. It's like, this is what this thing looks like. And then it makes antibodies. And then you get memory T cells and memory B cells, which are really important for fighting off influenza as well. And then it sees the virus again. And those antibodies, if you have a lot of them in your sera at the time you're recently vaccinated, recently infected, they can immediately bind. But so here's the thing. The antibodies that bind may not be binding in the same place where the mutations occur that make it human adapted. Does that make sense? So I do think you're going to get what's called cross seroprotection. So the antibodies, the sera antibodies that you make to a previous vaccine or a previous infection will likely bind well enough to help quell the virus. Also, the memory T cells, they recognize the virus in a different way that's much harder to mutate around. So that's why previous SARS-CoV-2 vaccines are still kind of helpful for reducing severe disease. Because the T cells will still see that virus. It's just the antibodies get tricked, so you still get infected. But the T cells can catch up.
Okay.
I feel like I need a whiteboard. We're going to do a whiteboard next time.
All right. So let me ask you this. So it's like this thing is constantly mutating, like within the scientific community. Like, is there research or testing being done to continue to adapt the existing vaccine to the new mutations?
Yes. So the most recently approved vaccine matches the virus really well. So I need to look up exactly when it was approved. Sorry.
No worries.
It's been a second. By the way, this is really fun. I'm glad we're doing this.
Me too.
Okay.
This is enjoyable. So, and then, so I heard it may have been that same podcast that somebody mentioned, like, yes, we have this vaccine, it'll at least still be partially effective, but we really don't have that many doses of it stockpiled. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's correct. So,
cool.
Yeah, we do not have a stockpile that will cover the entire United States population. We definitely do not. Right. So the most recent one. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I got the number right.
Well, I mean, we won't have to, have enough for everybody because I'm guessing about 50%, 51% of the electorate's not going to take another vaccine anyway.
Yeah, it's a big hoax, and you're not wrong. There's a lot of vaccine denial, vaccine fatigue, vaccine disbelief, vaccine questioning, even though these vaccines have been around for quite a while. So this vaccine was first approved in 2020. So that was
okay. So it's not like
pretty recent version. Yeah,
it's not super far removed. Okay.
No, and the previous ones were approved in 2018 and 2019. But there's about 4.8 million doses that are going to be supplied in the U.S. That was approved in earlier in 2024. That ramp up. And I think it was given the green light in October.
Okay. All right. So I have a whole bunch of questions about bird flu and COVID and like,
Oh wait, can I adjust something I said? Sorry, the last
sure.
stockpiles were done 2018, 2019. The previous
Okay.
approval was 2013. Just sorry, I like to fact check myself. I want
All
to make
right.
sure I get this right, but all the numbers,
I'm
yeah.
just I'm just going to word vomit a whole bunch of stuff here, and then you can pick and choose and elaborate as you want to. Um,
Awesome.
I mean, does COVID make people more susceptible to bird flu? Does long COVID make people more susceptible? Are there any like interactions between those things? Um, and let's just start with that. What are your thoughts on that stuff?
Yeah. So yes, and for a few different reasons. So first of all, there's pretty strong evidence in the literature and through several studies of groups of people that SARS-CoV-2 can cause immune system dysfunction and dysregulation. One of the ways that it does this, and I'm in the middle of writing a series on my Substack for this. I'm on my third part of the series if you're interested in reading. So you can, I don't know, link my Substack if you feel generous.
Yeah,
But
we'll put it in the show notes.
yeah, right on. Because I work pretty hard on those, and it takes a little while to put them out because they're really like a textbook chapter with all the references that you might want to find. But one of the mechanisms by which SARS-CoV-2 causes immune system dysfunction is downregulation of cells that produce something called interferon gamma. Interferon gamma is critical for fighting off viral infections. And when people, have an inborn mutation in interferon gamma, they're sick constantly with viruses. So you can imagine if that system is disrupted, it makes you a little more susceptible to bacterial infections, virus and bacterial infections. The other thing that may be problematic is a severe viral infection can cause lung damage, and it can take a little while to recover from that. And, scar tissue, lung damage, it's a playground for the next pathogen when it comes in. So it's going to be a more difficult course of infection for that reason.
Okay. Would prior COVID infections or long COVID or anything like that have any impact on the efficacy of a bird flu vaccine?
I don't think so, but that is a very good question, right? Because if your immune system is not behaving properly, you might expect there to be a dampened immune response to vaccination. However,
Okay.
that I haven't seen any evidence supporting that, and I do know that
Yeah.
other examples of immune system dysfunction can be overcome with vaccination. So if you have autoimmune disease, that is a form of immune system dysfunction. SARS-CoV-2 can trigger autoimmune disease. I actually have a whole Substack outlining that as well. Different types of autoimmune disease have been going up after COVID infection. But vaccination, if you have an autoimmune disease, still works. So it's I think I'm going to say it's unlikely to have a huge impact. There probably are some people it may have an impact in.
Okay. So, understanding that COVID was a coronavirus, bird flu is an influenza virus. What of the things that we did, like preventative measures to prevent the spread of COVID, like masks and distancing and things like that, would those be effective in a bird flu context as well?
Yes. So we've had a dress rehearsal for this, which is good news. One thing I want to emphasize, though, is that washing your hands is going to be more important with influenza. So
Yeah, I
you've
was
got to
just
start.
thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It lives for longer on surfaces than coronaviruses. Coronaviruses are a little wimpy when they're outside the body. Honestly, people would
Yeah.
say, "Oh, your mask is contaminated if you've been exposed to SARS-CoV-2," and I'm like, "Yeah, it might it might live for 12 hours and then it's gone, tops, So it's, influenza is going to live for 24 hours plus on surfaces. So you have to be really careful if you're outside touching door handles, whatever you're grabbing and touching, you have to wash your hands after. That's going to become really important. But the masking, the social distancing, the hand washing, those three things make a big difference for how often people get sick.
Okay. I'm I'm fighting every urge that I have right now in my own body to just, I mean, I remember, I remember seeing anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers and watching them throw their little tantrums in public and screaming at people and coughing at them on purpose.
Isn't that
And
assault? Wait, hang on, you're a lawyer. It's assault to cough
yeah,
on someone on purpose, right? They can
especially
file
in that
assault charges.
context,
Yeah.
especially in that context, because there's an intent factor. There is an intent. You're basically doing that with the intent of infecting someone with a disease that could be fatal. That's
Yep.
absolutely correct. Um, and I mean, I was so incredibly grateful to live in San Francisco during COVID because I, I never saw any of those people in person.
Yeah. Same.
Friends of mine who lived in other parts of the country absolutely did, especially my friends and family that lived in Ohio. But
Yeah,
um,
we live in such a bubble of scientists and doctors and professionals in this area that read and take things seriously that I didn't even realize that how serious this like anti-vax, anti-mask thing was until I went
yeah,
onto social media because everyone around me is like, yeah,
yep,
you wear a mask, we understand the science. Half of us are doctors and the other half work in research labs and we know what to do. So yeah,
yeah. And there were so many times that I'd be watching, whatever cable news show, and they'd cut away to an expert, and it's like, oh, that guy's at UCSF, or oh, that guy's in Mill Valley, and stuff like that. And it it
yeah,
was um, it was such a blessing to live somewhere where people did take it seriously.
yeah.
And
Several of the pandemic kind of response, I think it was Biden's expert response team, I forget what he called them exactly, came from UCSF. And, there's
yeah,
some really top people here. We did have a couple people kind of go off the rails. And, I went over a few things they said that were really not correct in terms of easily provable, well established science. And they
yeah,
got their 15 minutes and I hope they're happy. But, in general, the scientific community was widely united on this.
yeah. I mean, it's like, I bring some of that stuff up just because I mean, it was 5 years ago right now that we were all starting to hear about COVID.
That's true.
And, we
Yeah.
were a couple of months away from everything shutting down and we were off to the races. And so it's like, especially since it's only been 5 years, if bird flu hits human to human transmission within the next year or two, that COVID experience is going to be everybody's frame of reference for bird flu, I think.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's why people are very emotional about this, whether it's, being very worried about lockdowns. I can't do this again. It was horrific. Am I going to lose another family member? It's very real for many people in that way. And then
Yeah,
the knee jerk reaction in the other way of like, it's all a government conspiracy again. I can't believe they're doing this
sure.
stuff again, right? Everyone's kind of locked into their own very polarized experience.
Yeah,
And yeah, if I had a message around that, it's to say that influenza is not SARS-CoV-2. We started from zero effectively with SARS-CoV-2. We have a vaccine. We understand this virus. It doesn't spread as fast. The mutations that are also occurring with the virus, not only are they likely not to escape the vaccines that we have on deck, but they are unlikely to reduce response to common antivirals that we also know work well.
Okay.
It is likely to be more deadly than a regular influenza
Okay.
year. But hopefully, if we use all the tools we have, especially in the United States, we can head it off. And that's the point. We have to use the tools, we have to use our knowledge, and we can reduce the impact of all of this.
Okay. And I mean, it is just like a very strong, very negative deja vu feeling for me, just because, and you can comment on this or not if it's totally up to you. I mean, 5 years ago, right now, Donald Trump was president, and we were heading into this thing, but it felt like at the time that he, not 100%, but was surrounded, at least in significant part, by very, very competent people who understood what was going on and what it meant and things like that and how to proceed. And in 11 days, we're inaugurating him again. And those people are not going to be there this time.
Yes.
I think a lot of them are not going to be there.
No, a lot of them, laid out their heart and soul on the line and took, death threats and had to have heightened security and are
Yeah.
still, being hounded. And
Yeah.
these were,
Often by members of Congress.
yes, yes. And these are world-renowned experts who are textbook authors in this space. And they were saying things that were perfectly in line with well understood, known science. And again, I'll go back
Yeah.
to my earlier comment. Those people never take a science class again after high school. And we're talking about people who not only went on for another 20 years of education, high school, college, or at least 10, 15 years, high school, college, medical school or graduate school, and then postdocs and or residency. These are decade-long educational fields after high school, decade plus, 10, 15 years. Then they went into a professional career doing nothing but that day in and day out. And so it's, when these people speak on these subjects, they understand what they're talking about. And, to have some I'm just going to say it, some kind of half-assed, harebrained idea come
Yeah.
up.
They watched a YouTube video.
They watched a YouTube video that sounded scientific, and every scientist in the world's like, what? But,
Yeah.
there's so much of that
It's like,
going on. It's just like it's a deluge of like garbage, and you're kind of trying to get through
yeah.
it and explain to people like, hey, this isn't real. Like,
It's like when
yeah,
it's like when a stupid person listens to Jordan Peterson and they're like, "My God, this guy's a genius."
yeah.
Not understanding
There's
that
an
it's
art,
just word
there's
it's just word salad.
a salad, yeah. There's an art and a skill to just being able to talk and convince people and sound intelligent and go round and round and round.
Hmm.
But, one thing that often came up when I was debunking a lot of disinformation is like, listen, like we have data and we can point to this data, and this data is repeatable, not just in my lab. I've done hands-on experiments with influenza, but
Yeah.
other people, around the world who don't even speak the same language can read the scientific data. Science is like its own language, recreate the experiments in their lab, and it works in their hands too. So when you're trying to refute multiple studies from different people around the world who don't know each other, who often run competitive labs, who would love to destroy each other's careers, right? Because then they get more funding. They can't do it because the science is repeatable and it's established. If you're trying to challenge that, you need to bring your own data to the table. And that just never really happened. And some of the people who attempted to do that have had their medical licenses removed. Peter McCullough just lost his medical license. He
I
testified in
recognize
front of
that name.
Congress. Yeah, he testified in front of Congress, I believe, touting some things that weren't backed by real data. And eventually.
So let me ask you
Yeah.
about that. It's like when there's somebody like him who went through all of the educational steps that you've described,
Mm-hmm.
but then still gets to a point where they're just spouting bullshit. It's like, what
Yeah.
happens? Like where is that disconnect hit?
It's
It's
um
like,
it's stunning. I can give two more interesting examples that I think are important. So Sherry
yeah,
Tenpenny also finally lost her medical license. The State Board of Ohio finally said no more. She is the one who testified in front of Congress that vaccines make you magnetic. And
I
then,
remember that. Yeah,
yeah, and then unfortunately, the Surgeon General of Florida is still in place and still, protected in his position, but published a paper that was widely criticized. The authors of the paper refused to put their names on it, and he was saying the data showed vaccines were more dangerous than SARS-CoV-2 infection, but he never provided the data for SARS-CoV-2 infection alone. He left it out. And so the whole field was like, come on, what are you doing? 6 months later, he goes, oh, okay, yeah. Puts it in, says, okay, yeah, puts it back in. And it showed that the vaccines were protective from severe cardiac issues. Meanwhile, he's told his entire population not to get vaccinated.
yeah.
And or at
I
least the men of a certain age, they shouldn't get vaccinated. Meanwhile, the virus is more dangerous, significantly more than the vaccine. He just left that out. So, these are people who have MDs. I don't know what that turning point is. Thankfully, I don't think I've ever encountered it in my career. I can't imagine working for decades of my life and then suddenly deciding to abuse the field. I think it's really abusive. You hold a position of trust as an
yeah,
MD or a PhD in your field, and manipulating people and knowingly. I don't believe any of these people are unintelligent. I believe they're highly intelligent. I believe they know exactly what they're doing. Manipulating people for financial gain, for fame, for getting on TV, I think it's abhorrent. I think it's a total abuse of the field and their career and the people that listen to them. It's quite
yeah.
dangerous.
And I mean, you know, in thinking about like a worse or a bad version of deja vu, when I think back to COVID, it's like thinking about going forward. We reelected Donald Trump. We're probably going to have RFK Jr., Dr. Oz, and I think you were telling me about that guy who's been nominated to the FDA who believes in herd immunity, guiding us through this next one. Um, and it just leaves it. When I think about that, I just kind of get overwhelmed with this sense of, I don't know if despair is the right word, but it's just like it seems like there are so many people in this country who have just completely lost their faith in science and data and medicine, through, like we were just talking about, this process of disinformation and misinformation that's fed to them for profit or some other motive. And it just makes me feel like, you know, if bird flu actually lands and hits human to human transmission, at the end of that process, we're going to have a lot fewer people than there could have been if people trusted science and medicine and data.
Yeah, yeah. I have a few thoughts on that, and it's first it's disheartening. It's a little disheartening, a little concerning when you understand. I this isn't my full time career. I don't run around trying to debunk other people, but I see statements that are really blatantly wrong from the perspective of a scientist coming out of potential real leadership. And I would say that we are in uncharted territories.
Well,
We
I'll
are
throw,
probably the first
I'll,
first
uh,
nation of this size and this wealth and access and ability to do things like Operation Warp Speed. We did get a vaccine out fast.
yeah,
um, to be headed to have these groups of, world class scientists being headed by people who are blatantly adversarial to science, in my opinion. You can point to a lot of things they've written, a lot of statements they've made, and they are not operating within the realms of scientific reality.
Well, two of my favorites come from RFK Jr., who said there's no such thing as a vaccine that is safe and effective. And he also said that the COVID vaccine is the deadliest vaccine that's ever been invented. And I'm not a scientist, and even I can read the data and articles and reports and things like that to know that those two statements from him are false. Like unequivocally false.
Yeah.
And it, I mean, as with so many things, for me personally, heading into the next 4 years, it just leaves me, it's like I look at these people who are coming in, and it just leaves me with an overwhelming feeling of we're on our own, and there ain't going to be anybody to come rescue us. And, after tomorrow morning, the Supreme Court arguments in the TikTok ban case, it's like, they're going to take that away from us too during the next pandemic.
Yeah.
It's like finding people like you during the COVID shutdown and that pandemic, and a lot of other scientists and doctors and nurses and medical professionals. That TikTok became a huge trusted source of information that really supplemented things that I was hearing elsewhere and provided so much context and so much detail and so much greater understanding of what we were going through globally. And the
Yeah.
thought, it's just like, I mean, the last year has just been like this unending series of things happening that had previously to me just been completely unimaginable. And yet they keep happening.
Yeah. I fully agree. I think we truly
Yeah.
are in uncharted waters. I think, this is not to toot my own horn because I've seen, or, prompt myself up because I've seen the similar comments across all of the medical creators I know, on TikTok. People have said, "You are the reason I've gotten vaccinated. You are the reason my family member got vaccinated. I would send them your videos. You are the reason I masked up. You are the reason I survived this pandemic." I think, all of us who have posted on this and educated have gotten those comments. There's there's going to be, if TikTok goes away, it will remove a very easy way to communicate to the public for scientists to actually reach out and say, "Hey, these are my credentials. This is who I am. This is my take on XYZ." Now that does get abused,
Yeah.
right? The easy reach out to people, but I think TikTok has a interesting way of self-correcting and finding the good stuff. People are like, "Wait,
Yeah.
hang on, this person knows what they're talking about."
Yeah.
So yeah, well, and then there's some people who just never quite get there. There's a whole other side of TikTok I don't think you and I spend a lot of time on. So
Yeah.
maybe this is a little more of a rose-colored glasses view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to close it out with something funny, it's like, I mean, I've been a trial attorney for almost 26 years, and you've been doing what you've been doing professionally for quite a while as well. One thing that I will miss about TikTok is people with GEDs who can't spell and don't understand punctuation or sentence structure telling me that I'm wrong about the law and that you're wrong about science and medicine.
Yeah.
Our Dunning-Kruger trolls.
That is something like I wasn't prepared for. I've
Me
like
neither, man.
never walked into a room and had someone who didn't understand what a chemical bond was like start to rail on me about science,
Uh-huh.
and I was just like, wow, okay, like here we
Right.
go. What level
Yeah.
are we starting at? it was a new experience. I would say though that TikTok's been really valuable in that it teaches you how to take your expertise in one field and explain it to someone who hasn't had the chance to build an expertise like that. And it's really uniting in that. I've really enjoyed that. It's a little spooky looking forward into the future, how we're going to get through something like this again. A lot of the leadership has changed that got us through the last pandemic. I think, removal of fact checking from certain platforms is deeply concerning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that
more,
and the fact that Mark Zuckerberg got a perm before he made that video, I was just like, oh, that's a bold choice there. Yeah, that's not going to help. That's not going to help things anyway. So I'm just operating on the belief right now that 10 days from now TikTok's going away. Do you have other social media where people can find you, or do you want people to continue to be able to find you?
maybe I'll just disappear into the sunset. I told you guys, just wear a mask, wash your hands, get your vaccines. You're gonna be good. No, I'll stick around for a while. I've been
Okay.
enjoying this, so I plan to be posting more regularly to my Substack. I do reach quite a few people on that. I'm really happy with how that's been going. Lots of great subscribers, lovely comments, and I'll continue to post there. I am on Instagram right now, so I'm there. And let's see where else. Blue Sky. I've started an account, but I haven't started posting yet. I'll get to it. And I think those are kind of the three places I'll be for
All
now.
right. Outstanding. Send me those links and we will put them in the show notes. And any final thoughts, or you just want to be done?
No, I can talk forever. This is no problem. We can keep going if you'd like. Yeah, it's just not the most fun topic for everyone. So,
Yeah.
I think the most important thing when you're hearing something new that brings up an emotion, be it fear, anger, oh my God, do I have to go to the store and buy toilet paper because the next pandemic's coming? Do I have to stop eating
Yeah.
eggs and drinking milk, right?
Uh,
Are those infectious? Things that are really designed to travel fast because they're disinformation and they're scary.
yeah.
Make sure you pause, take a breath, see if it makes sense.
Yeah.
And start to try to look for valid sources if you can. And the tough thing about science is that it is very obtuse. It takes years to really become an expert in it, and it's easy to get turned around in the scientific literature. So do your best to find the helpers, the people who understand what they're talking about, who are trustworthy, who don't have a vested interest in making a buck off of you. Like, I did not start a company on COVID vaccine information, right? Like, I do this in
Yeah.
my spare time. So yeah,
All
look for
right.
that.
All right. So, as always, if anybody has any questions, please leave them in the comments. And, if we get some good ones, maybe we'll do a follow up interview. Thank you again so much for joining me and taking the time tonight. And, frankly, for the last 4 years, I mean, your TikTok page was instrumental in my ability to navigate COVID, during like the second 6 months of that first year and leading up until we had vaccines and all of that crap. So thank you again so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so glad it was helpful.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. I'll see you guys next week. And again, any questions, leave them in the comments. And please go follow me on my YouTube page. You can just go to YouTube and type in Hawk Podcasts, and my page will pop right up. Thanks, everybody.